Hi, everyone. Hello from CIE. This is Jess Kissel. I oversee the Work and Travel USA team here at CIE. Thank you, number one, so much for joining us today, and we thank you, in advance for your willingness and your participation to join us next week in DC and engage on a deeper level on the Hill. So, a few housekeeping notes before we dig in. Everyone is muted, so what we'll do is we'll save questions, and at the end you should see a little box where you can ask questions if you have questions. So we'll save questions for the end, and we are recording this webinar, so certainly don't feel like you need to remember everything, with our time together this afternoon. And certainly if you want to share it with other members of your team, that's great as well. So we are really, really grateful to have Kate Eltrick joining us today. Kate is president of KAE Strategic. I know some of you know her and have, engaged with her before. CIE, we work really, really closely with Kate, and we really, really rely on her expertise on the landscape in DC. She's very much dialed into, government funding, how the regulatory process works, policy. And she has so much experience. Kate was a former staffer at the Office of Management and Budget in the Obama and Clinton administrations on the Senate Appropriations Committee. And you're all going to get to hear more from Kate next week, as she'll be on a panel with us on Tuesday. So without further ado, I'm gonna turn it over to Kate. Thank you, Kate, in advance for being part of this today.
You're welcome. Hi, everyone, and thank you for making time to do this. It's one of the most valuable tools we have is for policymakers on the Hill to hear directly from constituents, people all across the country who engage with this program and value it. So we really appreciate you all making time today and especially next week to be able to do this. So we're going to go through a little bit of why we have this advocacy, what the landscape is and what's going on in Capitol Hill and Washington, D.C. generally, and then how your meetings are going to flow. So, the big question is, why would you ever advocate? What's the point of this? And I think the last couple of years, each of you have probably heard from CIE multiple times about the stakes that are at play. And I think the key thing is really, this is a program that is authorized by and overseen by the U.S. government. And so there's constant oversight and regulation. And if we don't justify the program and show the value, then, we risk it going away. So it's not, unfortunately, one of these things where the market that you guys have, where you have unfilled positions that you need people for, dictates. It's really a matter of a program that policymakers contemplated, decades back as a great way to engage with young people from around the world without taxpayer money at stake. So we appreciate people making the time to speak for themselves and your own experience hosting J1 students, and also how you run your business and the lengths that you go to recruit Americans and the challenges you have in filling positions, because I think that is what crystallizes it for policymakers, that this is not, that changes to these kind of programs have a real impact. So I think we'll go to the next slide. So one of the things that we have been focused on, particularly this year, is it's a new Congress. So as you all, I'm sure, well aware, the House is now in Democratic majority. So there's new chairmen of committees. But there's also a lot of new members in Congress, people who retired and turned over, um, and you probably had met with their predecessors, because that district, your business is a significant center in their district, but it's a new member of Congress. And so we really can't take for granted that they're aware of this unique aspect of how you run your business and the fact that you really value having exchange visitors. So we want to make sure that we treat everyone with the assumption that they don't know as much about the program as you do. And um, and then we also have, a unique space and time where the last 2 years we have been awaiting a proposal from the Trump administration about changes that they might contemplate in the J1 programs. And we don't yet have that, but we do have movement. So we have an interesting situation where basically the train is like starting to pull away from the station, but we don't know exactly the contours of what's on the train. But it's still a sign that things are going to start moving and that the Hill is going to need to look at these proposals once they do become public. So we kind of have three buckets of things that are going on in the policy space. So the first one is this House resolution. So we put that first because I think that's going to be one of the key asks that you have in your Hill meetings. You may recall in 2017 there was a resolution introduced in the House, and at that time led by Congressman Keating from Cape Cod and Mr. Lobiondo from Cape May, New Jersey area. Lobiondo has since retired, and so Mr. Keating is going to lead the resolution again this time. And we don't yet have a new bill number. You'll see there the reference to HRES 529, and you're welcome to use that reference in meetings on the Hill. And obviously, we at CIE can help to follow up with staffs and make clear once we have a new bill number. The nice thing about this resolution is it's not trying to set up any contrast with the Trump administration or other criticisms of the program. It really is just a presentation of the value of this program, both in our public diplomacy and ability to reach people from all around the world who wouldn't be able to come to the U.S. if not for this program, and the value of it to you as a business, that you are able to be fully operational or operate for longer seasons and those kind of things. And so it really is just on the positive side. And so that's kind of a nice thing to talk about when you're on the Hill, is being able to tell that this resolution is out there, but it doesn't take a position on what changes could come down the pike and whether they're good or bad. It just takes a position on this being a good program and its value, both to the U.S. economy and to our public diplomacy. So that will be the main thing that when you're going into these offices, we'll ask that people would consider co-sponsoring that. And we'll get into that more in a little bit. And then the next two items are really what we would call like the meat of this meeting, is because there has been some movement. This is an opportunity for you to provide an update. So going into the Hill office, say, we have some new information that you're probably not aware of. And that falls into two categories. So the one that we're most concerned about is what would be a new regulation. So the Trump administration has signaled that they are going to propose a brand new regulation that would basically carry out their interests in the Buy American, Hire American goals. And so that could mean new restrictions on the program to limit the hiring of people from overseas, even for temporary jobs. And we don't know the contours of that. So essentially, this is putting people on the Hill on alert that we expect a new regulation to come out, and that would be related to the BAHA, or Buy American, Hire American executive order. And the good thing is that they have told us, the administration has said that is going to be in the form of an NPRM, a notice of proposed rulemaking. And so that means it has to go through a pretty lengthy process. So that's a good sign for us, that there's going to be plenty of opportunities for us to engage and convey our views, and hopefully for the Hill to do the same. but we don't know the details of what's in that yet. And then the second, one back. The second regulation is the final step in a summer work travel reg that started in 2012. So this is something that probably 3 or 5 years ago, if you've been watching this, there was some interest in new proposals at that time that were developed by the Obama administration about housing requirements, job placement requirements. But for the most part, those things, we have kind of adopted them. We've gotten used to that being out there. So whatever regulation comes out, the final summer work travel regulation, we do not expect it to be too disruptive, and we know the general contours of it. I think the most significant thing is emphasizing the cultural component to these programs. So it is an interesting situation that we have two regulations going on two tracks, two different timelines, and different content. But the one that is the final step, we don't expect to be too disruptive. Now we can go to the next slide.
Great, thanks, Kate. So this is Jess jumping in with logistics. We're excited for this year. We're using a new platform for our Hill visits. It's called Voter Voice, and it has two core functions for you. So the first one is it will give you access to logistical details for your meeting. And then it also gives us the ability for you to do a meeting recap report to complete after each visit. We've been using it here at CIE, and it's pretty easy to use. And this is really what we'll want you to use to manage your in-person visits to the Hill. The access details for your in-person meetings will include a meeting snapshot, so where, when, and who, the legislator's bio, so overview of key committees, office staff, whatnot, and then attendees. Today, if we haven't already, we'll be sending a user guide out to all of you to give you instructions on how to use this, but we're pretty excited about it, and we think that it should really streamline the process before, but then also the ability to report after these meetings should make it easier for you. And then also with logistics, so dress code, business attire, pack light, but certainly make sure to bring your photo ID. You'll need that. Although we want you wearing business attire, you will be doing a lot of walking on the Hill, so make sure your shoes are pretty comfortable. Certainly, bring your business cards, and you'll receive a packet from CIE. And then also bring your own, if you have your own material that kind of speaks to the value of the program from your perspective, whether it's, stories from your participants, stories from your domestic staff, photos of cultural events that you do, anything that helps illustrate what the value to you is great. You'll have talking points from CIE, which we'll provide, and then certainly you'll want to bring a notebook and a pen. And now I'm going to hand it back over to you, Kate.
Okay. So a congressional office, people like to talk about this like that they're similar to a small business, that that the staff is there to make sure that the member of Congress is prepared at any, on any variety of issue. And so they are stretched very thin because they have to really cover anything and everything that could come up before the Congress, whether or not that is of interest to the member of Congress or not. They'll, there are half a dozen bills voted on every single day, particularly in the House, and so they have to know what's in that legislation and what their boss's, recommendation of what their boss's view should be. And it takes an awful lot of work to just keep an eye on all of these different things going on. So it's sometimes a little awkward when you walk into a member office and they have no idea what you're coming in to talk about, because usually they don't have any time to look into CIEE or into your business before you walk in the door. So you do have to make sure that you kind of start out by reminding them like why you're there and what the purpose of the meeting is. We try to have these meetings about once a year, which we think is the kind of minimum to keep people informed but not take away their time unnecessarily. But we do have a really important update to provide this year. So you want to kind of lead with that these regulations are starting to move in the administration, and we really need them to keep an eye on that, because that's a key thing that they need to take away and to be working on our behalf, basically. But as you go in, the most important thing for you to remember is that you're a constituent. You live in that district or in that state. And so it's very important to the member office to hear from people directly. And you have every right to be there and to share your views on a variety of things. We do try to make sure people are focused on the task at hand of explaining the J1 program and what the value is to your business. But as a constituent, you may have other things you want to share at another time. So let's see, next slide. So congressional staff are often very smart and hardworking, but they're also very young. It is a young person's game in many ways. Just the hours and the pace are very demanding. So don't be surprised if you meet with somebody who looks like they're 23. They could be. But you should also, recognize that they are in the position of making recommendations to their boss, of representing their boss in a certain portfolio, and so they're the right person to meet with, even if they look very young. So in House offices, typically they may have 5 staff members. In the Senate, it could be a little bit larger, maybe 8 or 10, and they're kind of divided out in issue areas. So typically you will meet with the staff person who handles the foreign affairs basket, State Department, international exchange, possibly the person who handles like immigration or visas, because that it maybe they decide that that's the best person to handle that issue. And you hope, and sometimes you may ask, that they will coordinate amongst themselves within that office, because sometimes they are a little bit in these little stovepipes. So staff act as filters for their bosses. They are really that link between constituents and the member of Congress, and also between everything that's going on in the news cycle and legislation that's being pushed and hearings that are going on in different committees. They're responsible for filtering all of that information and providing it up to their boss. But they also have a important job where they, after these meetings with constituents, they will provide a readout to the member of Congress, and oftentimes members ask for a memo after every meeting with constituents. So that information does filter up, and it's an important mechanism for them to be able to gather a lot of information. Something that's actually this year, our employer forum happens to be during a period of time when Congress is not in session. They are going to be back home in the district work period, as long as everything gets done this week that they hope to get done. So it will be a little bit quieter on the Hill and a little different pace, because the senators and representatives won't actually be in DC. They should be back in the States. But the staff will be here and working the pace. So in your meetings, we kind of see 3 objectives, and as you're starting to come up with how you want to present yourself and organize your thoughts into 3 different buckets. So educate, share, and ask. So the educate piece, I like to call your elevator pitch. This is really when you come in, you tell them like, this is the reason why we're here. This is my business. The J1 program does X, and why it's important to you and your business. So trying to figure out a way to convey that in 2 to 3 minutes um, is key. And then the part that is probably more memorable for people. So the educate is kind of setting the stage, and the share is what usually people will remember, and take away from the meeting is something that's a more personal anecdote of your engagement with a specific exchange student, or how this has made your business work in a way that it wouldn't have otherwise. So just trying to think of that personal story that fits for your unique business, and why it's so critically important that you're involved in this program, and why you value the public diplomacy aspect. And then the third piece is the ask. So this is what we're asking the member of Congress to do on our behalf. And the first thing is to be supportive of summer work travel. They could sponsor the joint resolution, which is the Keating resolution that's going to be introduced. They can support a directive that's in the appropriations bills, and we can talk more about that as well. And then the key piece there is asking them to let the administration know that they're watching the regulations. So they know that these regulations are moving forward. They know that the content hasn't been released yet publicly, and they want to be kept updated. So you'll have a copy of these talking points next week, and obviously this is archived, and you can look back at this and kind of make your own notes of how you would present this. But this is what we like to try to make sure we're emphasizing and leading with is the public diplomacy importance of the exchange visitor program. So the fact that this is the largest exchange program of any run by the State Department, it reaches more than 190 countries and over 100,000 people each year. It has really broad reach, but it also supports U.S. national security because it's increasing mutual understanding with people who wouldn't be able to see the United States on their own. They are not going to be able to afford to come here on a vacation. They are not going to be people who can afford a undergraduate education here in the U.S. And so if not for the exchange visitor program, they probably would never see the U.S. for themselves. And that idea of mutual understanding can really only be created with that personal experience of someone being here on their own. And I think those are the kind of things you can really relay how powerful that is for folks. And then you guys speak from a very unique vantage point about the U.S. economy and how necessary it is for you to supplement your domestic seasonal staff, how much you work to recruit Americans, but that you always have a certain number of positions that are unfilled. And if not for the ability to have summer travel participants, your business, would be impacted. And so obviously the program doesn't cost U.S. taxpayers any money, but it contributes over $500 billion to the economy each year. And this is a study that was done a couple of years ago to validate, how much each exchange visitor is spending, on their housing and their food, but also on incidentals and things that their own spending in the local economy is beneficial. And then the fact that these programs are valuable cultural exchange, people are working side by side with American students and staff, they're engaging with customers, and hopefully be part of your wider community and bring a diversity and viewpoints to your own community that is valuable as well. The study that came out a couple of years ago is really strong feedback from participants about how much more they understand America and its culture and people but also how much more respect they have for the way that we do business and things that could have tangible effects in changing their own countries. And so those are kind of those broad brush points, and then your own personal story is what would come next, your own anecdotes and that kind of thing. The delivery is always important. You know, Hill staff are notoriously double booked and running late and have very little time. Sometimes you could even have this meeting in the hallway. They don't even have a place for you to sit down. So you want to make sure that you have practiced having a clear and concise message and being able to convey those key points as succinctly as possible. You may only have 10 or 15 minutes. You know, some staff will interject with questions, some will kind of wait and let everybody get through their presentation, but you also want to be really conscientious that everybody in your group has an opportunity to talk. So you probably want to practice, and we do have some time next week to work on this, when you know that you're going to a meeting with a group of 2 or 3, 4 other people, that you all figure out who's going to present this piece, who's going to present that piece. Each of you should have an opportunity to say, you know, the business that you're from and what, and your own anecdote or personal connection to the program. But you probably don't want to cover the same ground in terms of the public diplomacy value or the impact on the U.S. economy. So depending on how many people are going to your meeting, you want to just kind of figure out how to divvy that up. And we'll have time again to work through that next week. Keeping in mind that if you have any questions that you don't know the answer to, it's totally okay to tell them that CIE will follow up. And when you know, one of the things you can do either in the Voter Voice app or just letting anybody with CIE know directly that we need to follow up with them with some specific data, or that they had a hard question. There's no reason for you to try to answer something you're not comfortable with, or if you're in the unusual position that the staff person is not very friendly towards the program, like, don't feel that you have to go any further. And, you know, ultimately, these are people-to-people connections as well. And it's an opportunity to build a relationship, and for that member office to feel like CIEE and you as an employer are an ally, and that you can be an asset or a resource to them if they ever have questions that come up on these programs. And so you want it to be friendly and for them to feel like, you know, we are going to work together. And always say thank you for your time at the end. Excuse me. It's great to try to get a photo. You can always ask the staff person if you can take a picture with them. Or if you're not comfortable, like when you leave the office itself, you'll see, and we have them in this presentation, pictures. There's a plaque outside the member's office that'll say, you know, Senator Leahy of Vermont, and it'll have the flag, and you can always take a picture just with the sign. And if you are into social media stuff, it's great to thank that member through social media, thank them for their time, appreciating that they care about this issue. And I think they enjoy having those little personal touches from constituents as well. Great to exchange business cards. It's helpful to email them after the meeting just to say thank you. And if there are specific questions that came up that needed follow-up, then we can work together and make sure that that happens in an email after the fact. They can't get snail mail on the Hill anymore, so email is the best way to connect. And then it's very helpful for us if you go into that Voter Voice app on your phone and fill in how the meeting went and just a few notes about what the questions were, or what the, you know, tone and views on the program are, because it helps us aggregate that very quickly and easily and keep track of all the meetings we've had over the years. And one of the best things is inviting that member of Congress and their staff to visit with exchange visitors while they're in the country. So whether you're a summer or a winter business, invite them to come out and have a site visit, get to meet students on their own. Maybe you have regular events like a 4th of July party, or you're interested in hosting that member of Congress for a site visit. So make sure that they know that, you all are available to meet with them in the district when they're back in the state. So your homework is pretty simple. I think the best thing is for you to go through and work on your own data and statistics about how many people you recruit and what efforts you make there, how many positions end up unfilled, what it means for the bottom line of your business when you can't get those front of house employees that you need, and what the challenges are in your geographic area. I think this is always really key for people to understand why you have these constraints on your employment is oftentimes there's just not enough people who are in that region who are available and interested in this type of work. And so obviously that goes towards the value of the program for your business and the wider community. Doing a little bit of advanced research about your member of Congress and the staff member you're meeting with is always good. Certainly good for you to know what their views are on certain policies. Always, looking for areas of common interest is great, and which committees they serve on. And we can also be helpful with that next week if you have questions. What we have laid out here are just some of the main committees that have jurisdiction responsibility that could have some oversight over the J1 programs. So in both the House and the Senate, there's an appropriations committee, and that appropriations committee writes the budget every year that funds the State Department. So that's the State and Foreign Operations Appropriations Subcommittee. So they have the day-to-day responsibility of making sure that these different programs are funded. And through that, we have gotten the attention of that committee to make sure that any changes to the J1 programs are done through a regulation. So that committee was involved in that process, and so that may be in their minds. Then you have the Senate Foreign Relations and the House Foreign Affairs committees. So they are called the Authorizing Committee, and they're responsible for looking at the State Department and what the policies are, the programs, whether or not there are changes that need to be made in the structure of programs, but they don't tend to deal with the funding issue at all. And then the House and Senate Judiciary Committees are responsible for the immigration law. So they have oversight over all of the different laws and policies within the State Department, Department of Justice about visa categories. They're the ones who look very closely at overstay rates and whether or not our immigration policies are working well. And then the House Education and Workforce Committee would be responsible for broad education policy. That tends to be more, with U.S. universities, but they do have an interest in international exchange and students coming from overseas. The structure of the committee is that each congressional committee has a chair from the majority party and a ranking member from the minority. So in the House, that chair would be a Democrat and the ranking member would be a Republican. And in the Senate, it's the reverse. The chair is a Republican, the ranking member is a Democrat, and that's just the ratios of how many Republicans and Democrats were elected in the last Congress. So again, that subcommittee on state and foreign operations, members who are on that subcommittee are pretty important to us.
Great. Kate, I can take it from here if you want.
Okay.
And thank you so much for your insight. So in terms of next steps, CIE has created different resources and links for you to help you, prepare for the visits next Wednesday. So next week, we'll give you a folder. We'll share a folder with you, which will include the resources listed up on the screen. For right now, what we want you to do is to download that Voter Voice app on your smartphone, start to review member profiles, important links regarding resources and logistical details, and soon you'll be receiving an email from Kara with all of that information, and that also will include the agenda, hotel details, and other logistics which you need for next week, and you need to pack. So with that being said, we can reserve a little time if anyone has questions. And if you do have questions, everyone is muted, so you'll just want to type them into the text box. And we realize that for some of you, this could be your first time doing these visits. And so, as Kate said, we're going to spend a good chunk of time next week also diving, more into the details with all of this. So we'll certainly be talking more about this next week, but our hope was that this helps set the stage. And it doesn't look like there are questions. So again, we want to thank you, so much for coming to DC next week, for participating in our employer forum. We are approaching 20 years of this forum, and certainly the past few years, our intent and our objective has really shifted, and so much of this is the advocacy component. So thank you all so much for participating, and Kate, thank you so much as well. Okay.
You're welcome. Look forward to seeing you all next week.
Yes, great. Okay. Thank you, everyone. Thanks so much, Kate.